The rain fell thinly and steadily over Prague, like an old memory that insisted on returning. The drops streaked the stained glass windows of the cathedrals and snaked across the cobblestones with an almost ritualistic patience. Everything in this city seemed made to last. Ezra Delacroix knew this, and that was why he had chosen Prague. The black car driving him slowed down as it entered a narrow alley in the historic center. The driver, a silent man with downcast eyes, didn't say a word during the journey. He simply stopped the vehicle in front of a building shrouded in shadow and humidity. The rusty iron sign on the gate read, Hotel Orium. Ezra got out of the car without looking back. He carried only a dark brown leather suitcase and an expression that spoke of the ages. The hotel doorman didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for identification, just nodded and opened the door. The lobby was dark, with old tapestries on the walls and a lingering scent of aged wood and jasmine. The grandfather clock near the central staircase read 11:43 p.m. The receptionist, a thin woman with her hair tied in a low bun and very light eyes, waited for him silently behind the counter. She handed him a metal key with the number 313 on it, without asking any questions. She seemed to know who he was. Or maybe she just knew that he was coming. Ezra watched her for a moment, trying to catch any trace of expression on her still face. Nothing. He climbed the steps slowly, without touching the banister. The hotel seemed alive. The creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, the rustle of a distant curtain, the faint creaking sound coming from the walls, all were part of a kind of subterranean breathing that seemed to accompany his steps. When he reached room 313, he paused for a moment. There was something familiar about the number, something that refused to emerge from his memory. He turned the key, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The room was large and quiet. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, and a single window looked out onto an alley where the rain turned everything into liquid shadows. To the right was an antique desk with an upholstered chair. To the left was a burgundy velvet armchair positioned in front of an oval, gilt-framed mirror. The mirror hung crooked on the wall, as if it had been hung in a hurry or by unsteady hands. Ezra dropped his suitcase in the corner and walked over to his desk. On it was a sheet of paper folded in half. No envelope, no signature. On the back, just your name. Ezra. His heart skipped a beat. No one knew he was there. No one even knew he had left London. The trip had been decided in silence, arranged anonymously. The ticket should not have existed. With steady but restless fingers, he unfolded the paper. What he left behind still breathes. The handwriting was fluid, feminine, almost ancient. The slightly faded ink indicated it had been written with a fountain pen. He read the sentence again. It didn't make sense. Or did it? His chest tightened. Ezra walked over to the mirror. The reflection was slightly distorted, as if the glass had been filed imperfectly. His own face looked different, paler, more tired. Behind him, in the reflection, the chair seemed filled with shadow. He turned quickly. Nothing. He returned to the mirror. The shadow was no longer there, but a sensation remained, a presence not seen but felt, as if someone had been sitting there moments before, or still was. He took a deep breath. He needed to sleep, to rest. He was here to disappear for a few days, to forget, but the paper still felt heavy in his hand. He turned it over. In the bottom corner, handwritten, was an address, 10th Street 11, at 11:43 p.m., the same time as the clock in the lobby, the same time he had received the key. The number repeated itself like an echo. Ezra laid down without taking off his clothes. The note rested on his chest. Outside, the rain seemed heavier now, and for a moment, before he fell asleep, he swore he heard soft music. Piano, slow notes, a familiar melody he couldn't name. The next day he woke early. The winter light was shining through the window like a pale blade. His watch said 9:12. He had slept little, but he felt awake. The note was still on his chest. No new paper had appeared, no new sound. He went down to breakfast, but the room was empty. The receptionist, the same one from the night before, appeared behind the counter as he approached. No smile, no gesture, She just placed a cup of coffee on the counter and said, "Today, at 11:43 p.m. Ezra wanted to ask how she knew, but there was nothing in her expression that allowed for conversation. He left the hotel. He wandered aimlessly through the city streets. Prague was as he remembered it, silent, dense, beautifully charged with a history that refused to die. Churches, bridges, libraries, statues that seemed to watch him. And everywhere, mirrors and shop windows, each one reflected not just his image, but a different version of himself. He stopped in front of a corner bookstore. A book in the window caught his eye. The cover showed a woman standing in front of a ruined mirror. The title was in Czech, but the image spoke for itself. He went in. The bookstore owner, a hunched man with a sleepy look, didn't seem surprised by his presence. He simply pointed to a bookshelf in the back. Ezra followed. Among the old books, he found something curious. A hardcover notebook used, with pages filled with handwriting identical to that on the note. Open on the first page. "You wrote to me before. You just forgot." He leafed through it with trembling hands. Some pages bore dates, others fragments of sentences. She said the mirror doesn't lie. 10th Street mirrors jasmine scent. He closed the notebook and returned to the counter. "Who brought this here?" he asked the bookseller. The man shrugged. Then he muttered, "It was left for you. Only you touch it." Ezra walked out of the store with the notebook in his hands. There was no doubt now. He was being guided. But by whom? Night came quickly. At 11:20 p.m., he put on a dark overcoat and walked out of the hotel toward 10th Street. The city seemed quieter now. The streetlights seemed more yellow. The air was thicker. There was something unreal about the way the buildings lined up before his eyes, as if Prague had folded time around him. He reached gate number 11. It was low, made of twisted iron, with symbols he couldn't make out. He pushed. It was unlocked. The inner courtyard was lit by 2 candles and iron holders. The main door was ajar. Inside, the sound. Piano. Spaced notes. Sad. Beautiful. Ezra walked in, and the moment he crossed the threshold, he knew his life would never be the same again. Music filled the room like an ancient perfume that lingered in the air long after its source had disappeared. The piano notes drifted down from upstairs, each with a weight and pause as if chosen by someone who understood not just the sounds, but the silence between them. Ezra climbed the steps slowly. The creaking beneath his feet didn't sound mechanical. It sounded alive. The hotel, or the house, or whatever this place was breathing. She reached the top of the stairs and stopped in front of a half-open door. Yellow light streamed out through the cracks, dancing like flames. The music was coming from inside, and so was she. He pushed the door open carefully. The room was spacious and unexpectedly delicate. Persian rugs, an antique lamp in the corner, a bookcase filled with brown-covered books, and a fireplace that only simulated warmth. But it was the piano in the center that dominated everything. An old black Bluffner, its keys slightly yellowed with age. In front of it, sitting with the posture of someone who had done this 1,000 times, was a woman. She wore a black silk dress, tight at the waist, flowing below the knees. Her hair was loose, falling in waves over her shoulders. Her face, initially hidden from Ezra, turned slowly when she noticed his presence. It was like being pulled by a silent magnet. "You're here," she said, as if she had been interrupted in the middle of a conversation already in progress. Ezra didn't know what to say. There was something in her eyes, a misty green, almost gray, that stopped him in his tracks. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice lower than he would have liked. She smiled, but without joy. Lillian. The name fell to the floor of his mind like a metal-weighted memory. It was familiar, but unreachable. "Have we met before?" he asked, not knowing why his voice was shaking. She stood up, moving with the lightness of someone accustomed to being watched. She walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a book. She opened it, took out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to him. Ezra opened it. It was another note. "It's not the first time you've met me. It's just the first time you've decided to stay." He looked up at her. "Is this some kind of game?" "No," Lillian said, sitting back down on the piano bench. That's what happens when you forget someone who tried to remind you of yourself. She began to play again. The melody was slow, almost absent, but deeply familiar. Ezra didn't know where he knew it from, but he knew he had heard it before. Maybe in a dream, maybe in another life. "How do you know my name?" "Because you wrote to me," she replied without hesitation. "Before you forgot." Ezra took a step back. "That's crazy. Selective memory is too," he retorted. "And you've always been good at erasing what hurts." He stared at his reflection in the living room mirror, and there he was. But something about the reflection was wrong. The position of his shoulder, the angle of his gaze. It was as if the mirror showed him slightly before, as if he were a few seconds in the past. "What is this place?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the mirror. "An echo room. Where would you try to forget whispers back?" Lillian stood up again, walking this time to a dresser in the corner of the room. She opened the top drawer. From there, she took out a notebook. Ezra recognized it immediately. The aged leather cover, the red ribbon. "That's mine." "It's one of his versions," she corrected. "The one you left here last time." Ezra stepped closer. The notebook held his notes. Some of the pages had drawings, sketches of a woman in front of a mirror, disjointed sentences, dates. October 16th, 2017. She touched my memory with her icy hands. "Never forget me, even if I don't exist." 10th Street. It always waits. He sat down. Lillian watched him with tenderness and pain. "Why don't I remember you?" She took a while to answer. When she did, it was as if she were choosing her words with the precision of a scalpel. "Because you locked me away and threw the key deep into a version of yourself that no longer wanted to exist." Ezra closed the notebook. "So why now?" Lillian sat down next to him on the couch. Their shoulders brushed against each other. The closeness was strange, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. "Because this time, you didn't come to run away. You came to remember." Ezra closed his eyes, and he saw, for a second, a fraction, an instant, him in another time, with her, in the same room, laughing, kissing her hand, writing something on the wall with ink-stained fingers, her telling him he should go, him saying he would come back. Then darkness. He opened his eyes, panting. "Did that happen?" She nodded. "And it will happen again, if you let it." Ezra stood up. He walked to the window. The street was empty, as if the whole world had paused, waiting for that conversation. "Why did you wait for me?" Lillian responded as if she were carrying time in her chest. "Because forgetting you would be easier, and I didn't want the easy way out." Ezra stared at her. There were 1,000 questions running through his head, but one stood out. "What did I do to you?" Lillian smiled. "Sadly, you erased me slowly, but I still breathed between the pages you didn't have the courage to burn." Silence returned to the room. The muted piano seemed to watch. Ezra walked to the door. He stopped. He turned to her. "What if I want to remember now?" Lillian stood up calmly. She went to him. She touched his face with her fingertips. "Then come back tomorrow. Same time. But be ready. Because remembering is not a path. It is a mirror." Ezra nodded. His eyes were moist. "And what do I see when I look in this mirror?" Lillian pressed her lips to his ear and whispered, "The version of you that loved me and ran away from it." He left the room without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft, almost intimate click. And the moment he stepped down the first step, he felt he was not alone. There was something behind him, or someone, but he didn't turn around, because for the first time in a long time, I was afraid of what I might recognize. Ezra returned to the Hotel Orium as if returning from a dream that refused to end. The streets of Prague were deserted, but not silent. The city whispered. The stained glass windows of the churches vibrated in the wind. The wet sidewalks reflected a moon that was hiding behind dense clouds. Everything seemed to be watching, as if the city had invisible eyes, watching his every step. As he walked through the hotel lobby, he noticed that the grandfather clock was still stuck at 11:43 p.m. The receptionist was gone. In her place, A closed notebook sat on the counter. The cover was black, with no name on it. Ezra hesitated. He moved closer. When he touched the cool leather, a shiver ran down his spine. Opened the first page. It was his handwriting, but he didn't remember writing that. Day 1, I got there before myself, but she already knew. He turned the page. It was filled. Lillian. I haven't written that name in years. She showed up again today. Or maybe I've come to see what's always been here. Her eyes pass through me like the breeze from a place I never knew I'd visited, but that recognizes me. Ezra slammed the notebook shut. He went upstairs to room 313. He locked the door. He sat on the bed with the notebook in his lap. He scanned the pages that followed. What he found were fragments, dates that did not repeat themselves. Loose, almost poetic phrases. She was sitting in the armchair. She didn't say anything, but I heard it anyway. The mirror doesn't just show who you are. It shows who you've decided not to be. The house at number 11 pulsates. The music calls me. Or was it me who composed all that? Today, she told me that my absence made her real, and that the day I remember her completely will be the day she can choose to forget me. The words were smeared on some of the pages, as if someone had cried over them, or written them while crying. Ezra stared at his own handwriting with a mixture of dread and awe. How could he have written so much without remembering? Or worse, what if he remembered and just decided to erase it? The next morning, there was no breakfast at the hotel. The lounge was locked. The receptionist had disappeared as if she had never been there. Ezra went for a walk. He needed air. But the air in Prague was not neutral. It was charged. It smelled of damp memory, of untold history. He walked aimlessly until he stopped in front of an old display case. Inside, among objects of no apparent value, there was a photo. Ezra younger, sitting on a stone bench with a woman beside him. Lillian. He didn't remember taking that photo. He entered the store. The salesman, a short gentleman in a gray suit and hat, looked at him with small, lively eyes. "Can I see that picture in the window?" Ezra asked. The man picked it up carefully and handed it to her. Ezra turned it over. On the back was handwriting identical to that on the notes. "We were never just a memory. We were a choice. You just forgot that you chose." "Where did this come from?" he asked the man. "You were left here 3 years ago. They said you would come back one day, and that you would know when it was time." Ezra swallowed hard. "Said who?" The man smiled. "A woman with green eyes, who played the piano as if she was remembering someone." Ezra returned to the hotel with the photo in his pocket. He went straight up to his room. In the mirror, now clean and perfectly aligned, his image looked more real than ever. But in the background, in the reflected chair, there was still the suggestion of a shadow. He picked up the notebook again. He started writing, even though he didn't know what. "Today I will not run away. If you are reading this, Lillian, it is because I found myself, or I started to." He closed the notebook. At 11:20 p.m., he left the hotel again. The city seemed different now. Quieter. More complicit. 10th Street. Gate number 11 was unlocked. As always, he entered the courtyard. The light in the room upstairs was on. The door was ajar. He went up without hesitation. Lillian was sitting at the piano. She was wearing a light robe. Her hair was tied up. She wasn't playing. She was just waiting. "Did you write?" she asked, as if it wasn't the first time she had asked the question. "I wrote." She nodded. "Then it's ready." "Ready for what?" She stood up. "To hear me. Not with your ears, but with the part of you that tried to erase me." She walked over to a bookshelf. She pulled out a wax-sealed envelope. "This is yours. You wrote it, but you never opened it." Ezra held the envelope. The wax was black. The seal was a symbol he didn't recognize. As he broke the seal and unfolded the letter, he felt a different weight to the paper. It was a long text. The handwriting was his. "Lillian, if one day you meet me again, and I don't remember you, read this in silence. I will know. I was weak. I ran away because I loved. And loving you is like looking directly at that which I don't know how to name it myself. You are mirror, and mirrors hurt, but I prefer the pain of seeing you now than the peace of not remembering you. Come back and force me to remember. Ezra. He couldn't hold back his tears. Lillian watched him, motionless. That was you. 3 years ago, the day before you left me here. Ezra tried to speak, but there were no words. I waited, she continued. Not for you, but for me, because I knew that one day you would stop being afraid of your own memory. She walked over to him. She rested her forehead against his. Are you ready to remember everything? Ezra nodded. Even if it hurts? He closed his eyes. Especially if it hurts. Lillian smiled. Then come tomorrow. Same time. But this time, with your eyes open. The day dawned cloudy. The fog in Prague seemed thicker than usual, covering the streets like a morning blanket that the city dared not remove. Ezra sat by the window of room 313 for hours, watching the almost non-existent movement of the street below. The envelope with the letter he had written years ago lay on the desk, open, like a confession revealed too late. He hadn't gone for a walk that morning. There was something different in the air, an invisible buzz, a silent anticipation. At noon, he heard a soft knock on the door. He got up cautiously and opened it. On the floor was a small, antique-hand mirror with a cracked frame. Beside it was a note tied with black tape. Today, don't bring questions. Bring reflection. No signature. No need. Ezra held up the mirror. The glass was dusty, but clean enough to reflect his face. Or almost. The image seemed incomplete, as if the light within the object was too old to capture such a vivid present. He sat and looked in the mirror for long minutes, and slowly, he saw something change. It wasn't him. It was her. Lillian. Not in the same dress as the night before, but younger. Her hair tied back with a ribbon. Her eyes held the same weight as always, but still with the spark of hope. She seemed to be looking at him through the glass, as if she were caught somewhere between reflection and memory. Ezra left the mirror on the bed and picked up the notebook. He opened it to a random page. A drawing, drawn in pencil. A large mirror with a circular frame, with two bodies in front of it. One of them had a blurred face. The reflection does not hide you. It demands you. The words were there, as they always were. That night, at 11:30 p.m., he left the hotel. The hand mirror was in his overcoat pocket. The city seemed to have stopped. The street lamps barely lit the alleys. The sky threatened a storm that would never come. 10th Street and found the door unlocked. He went upstairs. The piano did not play that night. Lillian was waiting for him, standing next to the large mirror in the living room. She was wearing a dark robe. Her hair was loose, as if she had stopped holding back something she no longer wanted to contain. Did you bring it? She asked, without looking at him. Ezra took the mirror out of his pocket and handed it over. She held it carefully. She ran her fingers over the cracked frame. That mirror was mine. Before you. Before everything. It saw who I was when I didn't even know it. She positioned him in front of the largest mirror. Now look. Ezra obeyed. The larger mirror was different. It didn't just reflect him. It reflected the room, but with a different light. A different time. Lillian was there, but sitting down. Crying. Behind her, he himself. Younger. Standing. With a suitcase in his hands. The scene was silent, but brutal. Lillian turned to him, to his reflection, and he said something. Ezra couldn't hear, but he could read lips. If you go, I disappear. And he went. The reflection left the room without looking back, and Lillian, in the reflection, collapsed on the piano. Ezra took a step back. I did that. Lillian, the real one, placed her hand on his arm. You didn't know how to love me at that moment, and I didn't know how to forgive you for that. I didn't remember, because it was easier that way. Ezra looked at the mirror again. The scene had changed. Now he was alone in the room, sitting on the floor, aged, looking in the mirror, the same mirror, life passing by, and he stopped. Was that the other possibility? He asked. Lillian nodded. The life where you never came back, where you erased me so much that you lost yourself. Ezra took a deep breath. And this one now. She looked at him. It's the only one where you can choose again. She turned the hand mirror towards him. So, are you going to look at yourself? Ezra stared at the reflection. This time, he saw everything. The women he tried to love afterwards. The countries he fled to. The nights he dreamed of a song without remembering where it came from. The early mornings when he woke up sweating, missing something he couldn't name. He saw the fear, the cowardice, but he also saw the courage to return, of being there. I want to remember everything, he said. Lillian nodded. Then come back tomorrow. But not alone. Ezra frowned. Like this. She came closer. She touched his chest with the palm of her hand. Bring out the one you were. The one you buried. The one who loved me and didn't know how to deal with it. Bring him out, so I can look him in the eye and tell him I'm here. Ezra nodded. What if he doesn't come? Then I'll go. To him. For the last time. They remained silent. The city outside no longer existed. Or it existed only as a backdrop to that moment where two old acquaintances stared at each other through themselves. Ezra left number 11 without looking back. The hand mirror was still vibrating in his hand, and inside him, something whispered. Ezra spent the day walking along the banks of the Vltava River, aimless, hungry, or thirsty. The image in the mirror still reverberated in his mind. The scenes from the past, the distorted reflections, the unspoken words, they all blended together in a kind of echo that seemed to shape his thoughts. For the first time, he was not running from a memory. He was walking with it. The city seemed to compress time. Present and past collided at every corner. Church bells rang out like sighs. Gargoyles on the facades watched him with silent judgment. Prague was alive, and Ezra was beginning to understand why. He wasn't just a visitor. He was part of the very cycle that kept the city trapped in unresolved stories. Strahov Monastery. He chose a table in the back, where the mirror on the wall was covered with a beige scarf. There was something strange about this choice. A place where reflections were avoided. It was a sanctuary for those who did not want to see themselves. A middle-aged waiter approached and, without Ezra asking, placed a glass of red wine and a small folded note on the table. Not every reflection shows you what you are. Some only give back what you fear. No signature. Ezra read those words as if he were being handed a verdict. He knew, at that moment, what he had to do. He left the wine untouched. He left the cafe and returned to the hotel. In room 313, the atmosphere was different. The air seemed thicker, as if the memory had real, physical weight. On the bed, he found a wooden box. Inside it was a round mirror, small, but its surface cracked in fine lines, like the roots of an ancient tree. Beside the mirror was a letter. The handwriting was familiar. This version of you was forgotten in a hurry, but it was never buried. It lives in the silences you don't hear, in the looks you avoid. Bring it tonight. I will wait for you both. Ezra sat on the floor, mirror in hand. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. And then he remembered, not from a specific event, but of a feeling. It was an ancient morning. The light fell on the face of a woman sleeping beside him. Lillian. They were somewhere else, another country perhaps. He remembered the sound of her breathing, the way the curtains swayed in the wind, the exact sense of belonging he had felt, and the fear, because in that moment, he realized he had fallen in love, not with just anyone, but with someone who saw all of him, and that terrified him. He had left 2 days later, without explanation. He had deleted photos. He had deleted messages. He had moved to another country, but that morning had never left him. And now, it returned with the strength of something that refused to die. At 11:43 p.m., as usual, he left the hotel. He carried the cracked mirror in his pocket. The path to 10th Street seemed shorter. Or perhaps it was because he was walking more purposefully. The door was already open. The stairs were silent. And this time, the sound of the piano accompanied him from the first step. Lillian was playing when he came in, but beside him was another figure. Ezra stopped at the entrance. The man beside her was him, younger, with a lost look in his eyes. He wore old clothes. and his face bore the same expression as the reflection he had seen in the broken mirror. Confusion, fear, a desire to escape. Lillian stopped playing and looked at Ezra. "Thanks for bringing it." Ezra stood still, his heart racing. "Is this real?" he asked. She nodded. "It's as real as what you tried to forget." Ezra stepped closer to himself. The living reflection stared back at him, as if it didn't fully recognize him. "You left me," said the younger version. "I was afraid. Of you, of me, of her. And now, I'm here." The reflection lowered its head. It wept silently. Lillian stood up. "You are both parts of the same body, but only one can decide what remains." Ezra looked at the reflection. "I don't want to run away anymore, but I don't want to erase you. I want to integrate you, accept you, remember you." The reflection nodded, slowly, and disappeared, like smoke pulled into a cracked mirror. Ezra stood, feeling empty and complete at the same time. Lillian approached. "Did you remember? Of everything that matters. And what does it matter?" Ezra held her hand. "That I wasn't strong enough to stay. But now I am." She smiled, and in that smile was the promise of something new. "Then come back tomorrow. One last time." Ezra frowned. "Why?" "Because tomorrow we choose the end." Ezra spent the night without sleeping. Sitting in the armchair in room 313, he watched the light of dawn timidly rise behind the dense clouds of Prague. The cracked mirror lay on the table, wrapped in a dark cloth. Now he knew that each crack reflected a moment, a trauma, a choice, an omission. It was no longer an object. It was a map of what he had broken inside himself. Lillian's letter echoed in his mind. "Tomorrow, one last time." The words burned like cold fire. Something was ending. He could feel it in his bones, but he didn't know what. At noon, he went down to the hotel lobby. The receptionist had reappeared, dressed exactly as she had the first day. But her eyes, which had been unfathomable, now seemed hopeful. She discreetly slid an envelope under the counter. Ezra opened it right there. "Zarebska Street, number 21. Blue house. Last door in the corridor. Bring everything you didn't know how to say. Also bring what was left between the words." There was no timetable. There was no signature. But he knew. It was the beginning of the end. He spent the afternoon writing. He used the notebook as a confessional, writing to Lily and everything he had never had the courage to say. Each word was a stone lifted from his chest. Each page filled, a piece of darkness that dissipated. At dusk, he dressed like someone was going to say goodbye. Not formally, but truthfully. He took the mirror, he took the notebook, and he left. The blue house was inconspicuous, its windows covered by heavy curtains. The street was narrow, as if the world wanted to hide the address. The door to the hallway had no number, just a golden, spiral-shaped knob. Ezra turned it. The door opened with a sharp click. The interior was a mixture of studio, library, and temple. Lit candles flickered without wind. Bookshelves filled with notebooks filled the walls. In the center of the room, an empty armchair. And opposite, an oval mirror with a gilt frame, from floor to ceiling. Lillian was there, sitting next to the mirror, wearing a simple white dress. The candlelight danced over her shoulders. She said nothing. She just held out her hand. Ezra walked up to her. "Did you bring it?" she asked, as if she already knew the answer. He handed over the notebook. She opened it. She read the first page in silence. Then he looked up. "You always wrote better when it hurt, because that's when I stopped lying." Lillian nodded and placed the notebook on a table nearby. "This is the last mirror," she said. "It does not reflect what you see. It reflects what you give." Ezra stepped closer. The mirror didn't show his face, or hers, or the room. It showed a distorted version of the city, a hallway of memories, closed doors, whispers coming from all sides, muffled sounds of music, of crying, of forgotten laughter. What is that? It's all you've locked away to keep going. But today, you'll choose what to unlock and what to leave behind. Ezra placed his palm against the glass. The images began to move. He saw his childhood, his strict father, his sick mother, the first time he lied to protect someone, The first time he lied to protect himself. He saw Lillian, in all versions, smiling in a coffee shop, waiting at a station, crying in a bed, playing the piano to an emptiness. He saw himself turning his back on all these scenes. And then he saw something different, an image that never lived. He, holding her hand, walking along Charles Bridge at night, laughing, stopping to kiss her, and saying, "I'll stay." Ezra fell to his knees. That never happened. Lillian knelt beside him, but it still can. Not exactly like that, but it can exist if you choose. Choose what? Stay, feel, exist, for real, with everything that implies. Ezra closed his eyes. Tears flowed silently. I don't know if I know how. You know, you just forgot, like you forgot about me. But look where we are. He stared at her. What if I fall again? I'll be there. And if I'm not, you'll get up anyway. Ezra stood up. He looked into the mirror once more. The image was now his. Whole. Not young, not old. Not strong, not fragile. Just him. And behind him, Lillian. What happens if I cross? Lillian smiled. You don't cross. You integrate. Ezra took a deep breath. He touched the mirror with both hands, and he let himself merge with the image. The room disappeared. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came the light, and then the familiar sound of a piano. But I wasn't alone anymore. Lillian played, and he behind her watched, with tenderness, with presence, with surrender. For the first time, he was whole. Ezra woke up before the sun. He wasn't sure if he had slept. His body felt too light for that, as if he had simply changed state. He looked around. He was back in room 313 at the Orium Hotel, but something had changed. The curtains were open, revealing a bluish dawn light, and on the desk was a map of the city. An old, yellowed paper with hand-drawn details. In the center was a dot marked in black ink, a circular room, with no streets around it, no doors, no windows. A space outside of space. Ezra felt his heart race. Below the map, a note in Lillian's handwriting. You remembered me. Now it's time to remember yourself. The room that's not on the map is you. Find it. I'm there. The note had no address, but there was a symbol in the bottom corner, the same spiral as on the wax seal. He dressed slowly, as if preparing to enter inside himself. He went down to the lobby. The receptionist was no longer there, and now he understood. She had never been there to guide him, but to remind him. She was a sentinel of memory. The city seemed suspended. The muffled sound of bells, the echo of footsteps on the wet cobblestones, the stained glass windows of the churches, flickering shades of gray. Ezra walked to the historic center, where the old music conservatory stood, deactivated for decades. The main entrance was locked, but he was not looking for a common entrance. He walked around the building, guided by an almost organic intuition, until he found a metal staircase that led to the basement. At the bottom, a wooden door with the spiral symbol carved in the center. Ezra took a deep breath, and he entered. The room was round like on the map. The walls were covered in mirrors, all different, of varying sizes and shapes. In the center, there was a single chair, and in front of it, an oval mirror larger than all the others, surrounded by lit candles. Lillian was there, standing, with her eyes closed, as if she had been waiting for years. "You're here," she said, without opening her eyes. "I didn't know if I could do it," he replied, "but I knew I had to try." She opened her eyes. This room does not exist in the world, only in those who dare to look inside without looking away. Ezra walked up to her. And now, Lillian looked at the oval mirror. "Now you choose which truth you will take with you." "I don't understand." She reached out and pointed to the side mirrors. Each one reflected a version of him. Ezra the child, Ezra the bitter, Ezra the passionate, Ezra the lonely, Ezra the arrogant, Ezra the broken, Ezra the silent. You lived through them all. But you always thought you needed to erase one to survive as the other. Today, you can integrate them, or continue running away. Ezra approached the mirrors, one by one. In each reflection, there was pain and beauty. shame and courage. Each image was an unaccepted chapter in his own book, and each one somehow had led him here. He turned to Lillian. "What if I don't know who I am?" She smiled sweetly. "So you're finally ready to discover yourself." Ezra knelt before the oval mirror. "What if I lose you?" "You only lose me if you stop remembering who you are with me." He leaned his forehead against the cold glass. Images came like waves. Him writing letters he never sent, her dancing alone in the living room, them lying in silence, listening to each other breathe. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "Me too," she replied. Ezra stood up. "I want to take it all with me, even the things that hurt, because all of this brought me to you." Lillian stretched out her arms. They hugged for a long time. "Then tomorrow," she said in his ear, "the room will disappear. And you, I'll be wherever you decide to keep me alive." Ezra nodded. "So, let the last day be true." Lillian closed her eyes. "Tomorrow, you won't come back here anymore." "Why doesn't the room exist?" "Because you won't need it anymore." Ezra looked around one last time. All the mirrors began to go out, one by one, like candles consumed by their own flame. The room disappeared, but he remained. And for the first time, Ezra Delacroix wasn't afraid of it. Prague dawned in a different kind of silence. Not the silence of sleep or mourning, but the silence of something that had been completed. Like a piece played to its last note, the city breathed calm. And Ezra Delacroix, when he opened his eyes, knew that this was the last morning. The hall of mirrors had disappeared with him still inside. Or perhaps, he thought, it was he who no longer belonged in that room. He was still in room 313. But now everything was clearer. The tones of the walls, the texture of the sheets, the sound of bells in the distance. It was as if his eyes had been freed from a veil. He sat up in bed, feeling the tiredness of someone who wakes up feeling different from one who fell asleep. The notebook he had used to write to Lillian lay closed on the table, next to the cracked mirror, now with the cracks smoothed out, almost healed. He knew what he needed to do. He went down to breakfast, which this time was normal. The receptionist greeted him with a light smile, without asking any questions, as if she already knew. Ezra walked up to the counter. He handed over his room key. "Will you be checking out today?" she asked, her voice calm. Ezra hesitated only for a moment. "Yes, but I think part of me will stay here." She smiled. Prague keeps well those who accept to be remembered. Carrying his suitcase lightly, he walked down the street to the place where it all began. Charles Bridge. Tourists hurried past, but he walked slowly, as if he were crossing something larger than a river. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, leaned against the stone wall, and closed his eyes. He felt the presence before he even heard the voice. "So this is where it ends?" asked Lillian. Ezra didn't turn around. He smiled with his eyes still closed. "It doesn't end. It just changes shape." She stood beside him. "The city never forgot you, you know, because this is where I gave up on myself. And this is also where you found yourself again." They stood in silence for long minutes, just watching the river flow. The reflections in the water seemed like echoes of what they had experienced, always there, even when no one else was looking. Ezra stared at her. "And you? Are you going to stay here?" Lillian looked away sweetly. "I exist wherever you remind me, not as a prison, but as truth. What if I forget? Then perhaps the city will remember me for you." Ezra nodded. "I wish it had been different, that I had stayed, years ago. But then you wouldn't be who you are now. And maybe I wasn't ready." He smiled. "Are we ready now?" "We are." She reached out her hand. "Can I have the mirror?" Ezra took the hand mirror from his overcoat pocket. The cracks were almost invisible. He handed it to her. Lillian held him gently. Then, she threw him into the river. Ezra's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because we don't need him anymore." The mirror slowly sank, reflecting the sky for an instant before disappearing beneath the surface. She looked him in the eyes. "Now, you don't need to remember anymore. You can just live." Ezra felt the world align around him, as if every street, every stone in the city, every note played by a piano in the distance said the same thing. "You came back in one piece." She took a step back. "Are you coming back?" "One day. Maybe." but not to look for you. And yes, to recognize what I found. She smiled, this time with her eyes shining. Then it's done. Ezra turned and started walking, but he stopped after a few steps. Lillian. She turned around. Yes. Ezra smiled. Thank you for waiting for me. She nodded. Thanks for reminding me. And then she turned and disappeared into the morning shadows, as if she had never left. Ezra walked to the train station. He carried only the essentials, but inside, he carried everything. As the train left Prague behind, he closed his eyes and smiled. I knew I would never be alone, because there are cities that don't forget, and there are loves that, even when lost, know the way back.